What you are about to hear is going to be 75% serious talk. 20% will be two old guys going down a rabbit hole and telling stories about football and rodeo and being at least 5% funny. Please be aware that we may not be grammatically correct or even sound like we know what we are talking about, but we are trying our best to learn and cope with the cards that have been dealt to us. We believe that we can bring hope to those who suffer and help in any way that we can. This is the Head Rush Podcast with Paul Fraze and Corey Berry.
Welcome to the Head Rush Podcast, where we talk about everything related to brain trauma, traumatic brain injury, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, traumatic encephalopathy syndrome, and repetitive head impacts. We cover how traumatic brain injuries can and will cause mental health issues such as depression, addiction, lack of executive function, memory loss, even suicide ideology, as well as many different degenerative neurological issues. These symptoms can be found on the Mayo Clinic and Boston University websites under symptoms of CTE. Our mantra, how to cope and find hope. We focus our energy on finding therapies and sharing hope through education and raising awareness.
I know, Paul. Before we get going, we got some great guests coming on, and I want to mention a couple things. But, Paul, our last episode, we talked about the hardest hit you ever took was Eric Dickerson.
Yeah. Helmet twisted, chin strap over my nose. Yes, yeah, that was, and I saw stars. Yeah.
So, what was the hardest concussion you ever took?
Well, I don't remember it. I mean, it was actually against a running back in Pittsburgh. I shed the guard. I was in the backfield, and the coach had told us on Wednesday films, put your head on the ball. And I put my head on the ball, and he dropped the ball, but I got knocked out. I just fell like a sack of potatoes, and I was out for probably 5 or 6 seconds. So, followed my teammates. We got the ball. I woke up, followed my teammates back off the field, and our quarterback threw an interception the next play. So I followed my defense back on the field, and I played 2 plays, and on third down, I actually came off the field, and I said, I used it in explicative, I believe. Where the heck am I? What are we doing? Where are we? So that was probably the biggest impact that I had, getting knocked out on, I think it was a Sunday night or a Monday night. So anyway,
nothing better than getting knocked out on Monday Night Football, huh?
Exactly. In the first quarter.
So before I introduce our guests, I want to talk about something. This episode, we're going to probably start off a little dark. And this is going to be about suicide. It's going to be about 2 great foundations that are fighting to help people like me. I bet you if it wasn't for these 2 people, I probably wouldn't have got the TES, probable CTE diagnosis that I have from Dr. Jeremy Tanner. But before we get started, February 10th, we lost a bareback rider. He committed suicide at 49 years old, and he had a lot of mental issues. His name is Pete Kennedy. He was out of Tucson, Arizona, born actually in Pennsylvania, Franklin, Pennsylvania, and then moved to Tucson, Arizona during high school, and then where he ended up passing away was China Grove, North Carolina. And he lost his life to suicide. And Casey, I had a long 2-hour conversation.
His son, yeah,
which is his son. And they're sending the brain of Pete to the University of Pittsburgh Brain Bank. And I just want to mention, you see 2 pictures of them up here, one on a bareback horse and the other on a standing there. And I just want to give our prayers and thoughts to the Kennedy family. We've had one diagnosed CTE in rodeo, and that was Ty Posabon, a bull rider. And we don't know if Pete had CTE or not. We'll know in a couple months. But me and Paul are going to bring Casey and his Casey to our podcast to talk about this even more. And it was utterly amazing. And it's by the grace of God, I got to say this. Our episode dropped Monday. Our first episode of the Head Rush podcast dropped Monday. That night, Jim Bob Custer sent Casey our podcast. He watched that and also watched Quiet Explosions, I think Tuesday night. And I think we talked on Tuesday, or was it Wednesday?
I know you had a 2-hour conversation with Casey recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is, and he found a lot of hope and a little bit of closure listening to our podcast. So when we talk about this today, we have two great guests, but Pete Kennedy is in my hearts and in my prayers, and his family. If he ends up having CTE, it's just another one down. And I know that there's been other Cowboys diagnosed with CTE, but they're not making their names public. And I'm not going to make them public because the family requests that they don't. So I just want to say prayers to Pete Kennedy and his family. Now, for our guest today, we have two great guests. First is the Patrick RISHA Foundation, and the Patrick RISHA CTE Foundation sponsors us. Mm-hmm. And I really want to say thank you, Karen, for being here, Doug, for being here. You guys are awesome people, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing to help this cause. Beautiful people.
Absolutely.
And they lost their son to suicide also, which was diagnosed with CTE. And we'll get more into that and what stage and all of that. And our other guest, I'm going to say it, and I normally don't cuss, but we got a true badass on the podcast, a true badass. Bruce Parkman. Green Beret, rugby player. I mean, I don't think there's a rougher sport than rugby. They're like Cowboys. They don't wear pads.
Rugby players have a screw loose or two. So I don't know if that's true, Bruce, but in your case, no.
And he lost his son also to suicide. So this episode, what we're doing is we're talking about the causes of CTE, the mental issues that come with it. And Bruce, I'm not sure if your son was diagnosed with CTE or frontal lobe damage.
Yeah, he was not diagnosed with CTE. And when we challenged the findings with Dr. McKee, we convinced her to go back and take another look for brain damage, which we were studying at that time as being, one of the factors that contributed to his mental illness. And, we funded a $250,000 study that, proved that not only his brain, but 100% of the brains under 30, to include Patrick's brain, were found to have structural damage. So yeah, he had all the symptomology of repetitive head impacts that is now known to be correlated with mental illness that ended up taking his life.
Jeez. And, I've never lost a child. Thank God. I've lost my parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, but I've never lost a child. So I know you lost your son to
myotubular myopathy. He actually had a muscle disorder. So yeah.
And you wrote a book,
Game Changer, A Boy, a Dog, and a Cure. So I would say you can get that book on Amazon and everything else, right? Absolutely. Yep.
And buy that book. So I don't have the feelings or understanding of losing a child. And I know if I lost my daughter, it would crush me and it would devastate me. And that's just, I don't know that feeling. I know the feeling of losing parents, aunts, and uncles, and a little sister. but I've never lost a child, and my heart and prayers go out to you. And Bruce, being the badass Green Beret rugby player you are, man, again, my hat goes off to you for your service to the military. My brother was a Ranger. Military is very clear and deep in my heart. I had nieces and nephews over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I just want to thank you for your service. It was tremendous, and thank you. I can't say much there's nothing bad about our military, and I think Pete Hegseth is only going to make it tougher and better.
I appreciate it. Well, the real badass here is Karen. She's the one that picked this fight a long time ago, man. That red-haired woman, man, is a Tyrannosaurus Rex when it comes to raising hell, and I'm just glad to follow right behind her, man, because that's the true badass in this show.
I want to cover that, because I had the privilege and honor of meeting the three of you back last year and this last spring in Tampa at the PARKMAN Foundation conference that you had. And Bruce, I know you were running on adrenaline because you worked so hard to put that together. And I actually had the opportunity to walk with Karen and Doug back to the hotel one night before we all met afterwards. And actually, they received, I think, what was the Mac Parkman? They received the first award that the Mac Parkman Foundation awarded.
The Mac Award, the Mac.
The Mac Award, right? So really quick. So I'm in a club with you, all three of you. We did lose a son, and we lost him to a muscle disorder, and he was one of 55 known cases in the world when he was born. We now know there's 5,000 to 8,000 kids with it, but what we found out is there's true pioneers that actually bring the malady, bring the issue to light. And I really felt that when I met Doug and Karen, that they were the true pioneers. And turns out they've been doing this for 11 years, right? And then I meet Bruce Parkman and his wife and the family and see truth be told, I was stalking Dr. Gordon and Ann McKee. So, because she's my hero, right? And I never met Ann McKee, but Dr. Gordon I work with his Millennium Health. Anyway, I got to meet you, Bruce, and I got to see that you're the catalyst that comes along. And we were kind of like the catalyst that came along to pioneers in an orphan disease state. And you're the catalyst, and catalysts, they instigate the chemical reaction, and they never deplete. They never run out. And that's pretty, you're darn tired right now. I know that, but you're on a podcast.
Tired to talk about this, bro.
Yeah, that's right. You're on a podcast to talk about what your foundation does. Karen and Doug are on this podcast to talk about what you guys do. And we can't thank you enough. We appreciate it. We need to get started and get into the meat of this podcast.
Let's dig.
So what are the stories of your foundations? And Bruce, I'm going to give it to the founding family, and ladies first, of course, since we're in Texas, we do believe in that. Karen and Doug, tell us a little bit about the story of your foundation and what you're doing to help fight the cause for people like me and Doug or Paul.
Well, you're right. It started about 11 years ago. Patrick was 32 years old and had been on 0 sleep for 3 nights, was a little bit agitated about something. I was on the phone with him and lost him while I was on the phone with him. And we had no clue really what happened, but we were close to knowing. And it was suggested to us about a month before he passed that all the things that we had been dealing with since he graduated from Dartmouth could be from his playing football. And so we submitted his brain to the University of Pittsburgh, Julia Koffler, and she came back and said he had stage 1 and 2 CTE. And I cried at the time because, just to go back, when Patrick graduated from Dartmouth, he was handsome, he was smart, he could just grab a room, you just fell in love with him instantly. He could talk about anything, any subject. He had an opinion, and it was always enlightening. And but when he came back from Dartmouth, he was reclusive. He stayed in his room. He would go on job interviews and really flub them, and didn't even want to go on job interviews. Just he had a hard time getting going, and every now and then he would take Adderall or something, and it would help him, and he would do well for a little while, and then he would try Percocet, and then he'd tank again. And so we started seeing depression. We started seeing anxiety, the ADHD I just talked about, not being able to sleep, anger, explosive anger over nothing. They were silly things. He was not making sense. At times, I truly think he was schizophrenic. He would tell me that he was having images in his head, that if I knew what they were, he would couldn't tell me because I would be scared. He was just changing in front of our eyes. He stopped being able to tie his shoes. He stopped being able to sign his name. And the terrible thing about CTE and repetitive head impact, and I'm not convinced CTE is really what causes the symptoms. I think it's the repetitive head impacts and inflammation, but that's another story. But the trouble with repetitive head impacts and what we do to young kids' brains is that there are so many symptoms that look like drug addiction. And he had drug addiction issues, but he also was slurring, he was stumbling. And many times when I would see him slur or stumble, I would think, he's on drugs. And he really wasn't. He was just in trouble, mentally in trouble. And when we got the diagnosis that he had CTE, it just, as a mom, I was devastated that I, for one, let it happen, and for two, didn't handle it properly. And I didn't handle it properly because I didn't know what I was dealing with. CTE is like an invisible disease. You don't really see it. It's like anxiety or depression. And people can treat that and deal with that and live with that all their lives. If we would have known he had CTE, we would have figured it out, and we would have struggled some days. We would have had bad days, but we would have hugged him and got him through the rough days. We would have done everything we could day after day. And I'm sure there would have been some really rough days and rough times and nights awake at 3 a.m. with funny ideas that he had. But I also think he would have been there to see his son play baseball. He would have been there to give him advice and talk to him, and been there to lighten up our Thanksgiving days. And, I just think had we known what we were dealing with, he would still be here. So that's why we started the foundation And anything to add?
When Karen said she would have handled things very differently, it's so true. And one of the good things that's happening now, if there is any good coming from this, is that when we understand this disease and we realize it's not addiction, when we realize there's brain issues, or as Bruce speaks so eloquently about mental illness, we can treat people with dignity and help them get through days. Parents always want to help their kids stand on their own 2 feet, do a little tough love, help them grow up. And, sometimes that includes letting them hit bottom. Well, in some cases, that's the appropriate treatment. But what we learned the hard way was that we needed to help him live through the next hour or the next hour and a half. And I think the more we learn about this disease, the better we'll be able to do that with other people.
And I tell you, I understand fully with my TES and diagnosis. It really helped me find closure, and it gave me a chance to see one of the best in the nation to get the diagnosis. But it also gave me a little bit of closure that, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. Now what do I need to do? And thank God I found Paul, who put me in touch with the Mayo and Mark Gordon and all of this. And I mean, just last night we were on our way to pick Paul up at the airport, and a car cut us off, and my rage just flared just like that. And I was yelling at my wife, hit him, just run into the back of him. And it's stupid. And then we went to dinner last night, and a person snuck up behind me, and I scooted back real quick and was real startled. And I understand so much of what they're going through, where before August, I didn't have a clue. I was seeing a good neurologist that knew about CTE, but he didn't have the skills to give me the TES. And I think it's really neat that we need to get the word out and talk about it and get more out there and noticed. And with that, Bruce, what's your story with the PARKMAN Foundation?
All these stories are, they start the same. My son was an amazing, loving, generous human being that should still be here. During COVID, he was suffering from acute schizophrenia, depression that he never told anybody about. And, I want your listeners to understand that, a lot of these kids nowadays, they do not want to let their parents down, and they mask a lot of symptoms. And some they can't. He was acting, more, a little bit. He spent a little bit less time with the family, wanted to be alone a lot. And we're like, he's 17, getting ready to join the Army. Kind of makes sense, And so what we thought was, a child growing up, learning to become a man, was a young man suffering from a lot of pain that he could not share with anybody. So on September 24th, 2020, he was heading to football practice, first day of practice. He didn't want to play ball, but the kids wanted him to play. The coaches asked him. He was the blind side guy. He was an amazing athlete. But he didn't know how to tell them. He didn't want to tell me. And because I already told him, you're not playing. They wanted to play football in the spring because of COVID. I said, you're not doing that. You join the Army. What if you get hurt? That's crazy. And he was like, all right. But then they came up with this fall thing. Well, he hugged me and said he was going to practice. And an hour and a half later, my daughter calls me screaming and says my son's going to hurt himself. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I just gave him a hug and a kiss. And he's like, no, he's on top of Pulpit Rock, which is a huge, massive rock foundation in the middle of Colorado Springs. But my son had left a video saying that he had been schizophrenic and depressed for 3 years. He couldn't take it anymore, and he was done. And when he said he was done, he got happy. He's like, I'm done. I am done. And what we know now, because he had a healthcare app on his phone, is he took 39 steps in 7.2 seconds and launched himself off that rock, absolutely stone cold sober. And we had a day and a half of manhunt. We were out till 5:30 in the morning. We couldn't find him because God had placed him in a crevice. I mean, right below us. We didn't know. We found some shoes. He had hit so hard. We found shoes 100 feet away. We're like, where did he go? So we thought, his phone kept pinging. We're out all night. I was back up on that rock. I had 30 minutes of sleep. I was finding my son. Finally, after a certain amount of time, they allowed the dogs to be called in because they're an expensive resource, and the dogs found him, and they wouldn't let us see the body. So we had no clue. Our son was gone. We did not know what it was. Drugs, Satan, pornography, a girlfriend. Why? Why was this boy, this amazing, amazing child, no longer here? I had a loaded gun with me when he was found. I was clearing homeless camps, trying to find my son. And I literally thought about just ending it because of the grief, man, the pain, the thought of living without my son. He was everything to me. But then I saw my wife and my daughters, crying, sobbing, and I knew I couldn't leave them. That would be the wrong thing to do. So cleared my weapon so the cops wouldn't see it. That's the last time, that's the last thing you want a cop to see. And we prepared to bury our son. How God plays in this is unbelievable. When God wants you to do something, and, you mentioned earlier, Corey, about your God mission. This is the only thing I'll do for the rest of my life, is now that I know what is going on, this is it. And God played an enormous part in what happened next, from my friend, his best friend's dad being a police officer that had handled over 2,000 suicides, able to keep me alive and just talking to me every day. This is why you couldn't have beat this. It's, and trying to understand. But we were wondering why. And because there was a lot of criminal activity, he was getting drugs. Turns out he was medicating his schizophrenia with marijuana. The football team broke into our house, broke into his car, tried to break into his locker. And we're like, what is going on? On top of everything, now we got a homicide investigation, a criminal investigation, and on top of burying our child. And we got people flying in. The last thing you really want, you just want to be alone. You don't want nobody around. But my son was so well respected, much like Patrick. We had 1,000 people show up at his service. And prior to that, because of the criminal activity, we were convinced by a national leading pathologist that we shouldn't cremate the body because we were waiting on the autopsy. The autopsy came back absolutely clean. So I challenged the coroner. Why is my son not here? Why am I living in this hell? Unknown, not even know. We had no clue at that time. 3 months later, why our son was dead. And he said CTE. He just mentioned, he said, well, does your son play contact sports? I'm like, well, hell yeah, he's an American. He played rugby, played hockey, played football, he played soccer. He was a wrestling captain. I mean, he played everything. He goes, well, I don't have the equipment to do an exam, but you need to check out CTE. I'm like, what the hell is that? So typed in CTE, who comes up? This amazing, warm-hearted, redheaded woman. I left a message and I said, look, I just found out about this thing called CTE. The coroner said I need to talk to somebody. Can you help me? Karen called me back in 15 minutes. And from there, we went to Concussion Legacy Foundation, which led us to Boston University. And then, of course, they gave us the interview and then they said, we cannot believe this. But Mac would have been a great donation. We're so sorry. I said, why are you sorry? They go, well, you don't have the body. It's been 4 months. He's been interred. I go, oh no, I still got the body. They freaked out. They called up and bigger than heck, we were able to make a donation. So now that I knew there was something called CT out there, people started telling me, don't expect your son to have a CT diagnosis because he's too young. But my wife then was a recovered alcoholic who had relapsed heavily. So I was literally by myself. I had a new stepson that just moved in with me that I was trying to fix. I had to run a company, move my family out, clean the house, handle the funeral affairs. It was pretty much hell. But I wanted to know why he wasn't here. And I just started reading. I read every research paper I could on mental illness and brain damage. And what an old, angry man, was able to put together is that my son's mental illness was highly and probably caused by the thousands of hits he took because he played 10.5 months of contact sports or snowboarding every year. I figured out that mental illness comes from a damaged brain, and the same types of damage that was known to cause mental illness is caused by contact sports. So I said, I'm done. Why didn't I know this as a parent? Why was I not aware? Much like we have seatbelts and helmets and our kids don't drink and drive and they're not around guns, that this is a risk to my child. And so then is when I decided to use my God-given loud, angry mouth for a reason. And I started our son's foundation.
God bless you. Welcome to the Head Rush Podcast, brought to you by the Patrick RHI CTE Awareness Foundation. Karen Siegel, thank you so much. Paul?
So go to stopcte.org, learn about their foundation, and they are sponsoring us for the next year. We are thrilled to have them team up with them and bring awareness to this disease.
So please go to their Facebook page, go to their website, check them out. Karen is very, very, very willing to work with you. Contact her, and if you do know her, thank her for us, or just go on their Facebook page and say thank you for sponsoring the Head Rush Podcast.
Karen, you had mentioned if you knew, it would have been different, and I guarantee, and at 47 years old, I'm 59 years old now. At 47 years old, my brain chemistry changed, and I had that anger, rage, and you're going to listen to me this time. I don't care. And I went 0 to 60, and I didn't care. And 6 months later, I get a call from my friend Chris Nowinski at CLF and says, "Hey, we're trying to find biomarkers for CTE. Let's get you up there here." And I said, "Okay, something's going on with me. I want to know what it is." But okay, if you had known, and Bruce, I know you're going to agree with this. And this is your life mission now, because I read chapter 2. I read your whole book, and I read about the synaptogenesis and the myelinization and it's knowledge, because you could have made a difference in Patrick's life. You could have made a difference in Mac's life if you knew. And the problem is, most of these parents don't know.
None of them do.
None of them do. And one of the questions, so we feel the need to let the world know, how do we do that? And I know you guys sometimes you're knocking your head up against a wall. You think you're not doing anything, but now all of a sudden you got some legislation going, or you're trying to do certain things. But what kind of roadblocks have you guys encountered trying to bring knowledge to this area, the CTE, or repetitive head impacts causing mental illness, mental issues?
Karen, go ahead. Tell them that football story about you. Nobody's allowed to talk to you. That's one of the best.
I don't know what one that is.
I want to hear it if it has something to do with the football people saying we don't want to talk to you, because I know exactly what you're talking about.
You know what he's talking about?
Oh, yeah. This was early in the foundation. We're trying to raise awareness locally, and we were going to the local high school football games and leafleting cars, and people were calling the police, and they were also saying, "Don't take that brochure. Don't take that brochure. It's against."
Kids were leaving the team.
we don't want you. Don't let anybody know. And we still have the same headwind, which is that, we have the concussion protocols, and we're making the game safer by changing the rules. and we've got the best equipment now because you can spend $1,500 on a helmet. And they're all, in our humble opinion, those are all filters on a cigarette. It's still a cigarette. You can say it's a safer cigarette, but it's still a cigarette. And Bruce said it beautifully. When we beat up our brains, we're going to have issues. And if we can make people aware of that, and I'm sorry, it's really your job to talk. Yeah. If we can make people aware of that, we've done a good service. We can't prohibit anybody from doing anything in this world anymore. If we could, there would be no collision sports and there would be no war and there would be no armies. Let's just knock that all off. Well, we can't do that. But as Bruce said, if I'd only known, as Karen said, if we had only known, maybe we can take measures to protect our kids first and then help them and care for them if the worst should happen.
Well, I know when, Bruce, you had your podcast on Facebook and you had the 6 or 7 people on there talking about safety first and all of this, I mentioned that the NFL only has, one practice a week now with pads?
That's new. You've shared that, and it's amazing if they are, because we used to do 7 days in a row of double sessions during training camp. So
that's true.
And then one other person said they're doing it in college also.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that we're all trying to change now is that, we can all just about eradicate CTE because the key point is the amount of exposure. How many times does the brain take a hit? Now, we feel like many that this should be an adult sport, but that's not going to happen in America. But if we can prevent any exposure till the prefrontal cortex starts to, develop in high school, and then we take the contact out of practice. Right. Make sports about healthy activities. Make it about teammanship. Make it about brotherly and sisterly love. Make it about being athletic and cardiovascular and all this other stuff. If we just did this one thing, if we took the contact, the heading out of soccer ball, we talk to kids whose coaches have other kids throw soccer balls at their heads for 5 to 10 minutes at a time. We have soccer kids that take their life because heading a soccer ball shifts the brain. If we took heading to soccer ball, checking in lacrosse, checking in hockey, the impacts in cheerleading, gymnastics, wrestling, and everything, just work on drills. Look, your kid might get a college ride, and that's great. You're not going to stop the talent. But it's the amount of exposure. If we just did that, and just taking football, for example, the NCAA and the NFL, both the Ivy League did not practice. They have no contact during the season from what I hear. NFL doesn't either. Why can't our high schools, 99% of them, practice 2 to 5 days a week? If we remove that, we could eliminate 60 to 80% of the RHI that these kids suffer. They can play these sports, but they can't play football all year long. Play one sport, play one season, and then give your brain a rest. My son suffered from back-to-back concussive sports and then again snowboarding. So the issue is, can these sports be made safer? Absolutely. No doubt in my mind, but it ain't helmets as Doug pointed out. Okay. It's not pads. It's not guardian caps and things around your neck. It's RHI. You eliminate that, reduce that, CTE goes away. And now you put a whole bunch of researchers out of work, and they don't want that either, but that's a whole nother story, but we can absolutely eliminate the issue of CTE. There'll be some mild damage, but imagine becoming an NFL player and Paul not having these issues and enjoying your earnings, right? And not going through a lot of the anguish that many NFL players do. This could be the reality, but we need to wake the hell up and start making the right decisions in the name of our kid.
You were saying, did you say 60 to 80% reducing the RHIs, but just by doing the game day collisions?
If you're practicing 5 days a week and playing on Saturday,
right,
like you do in high school, right? You take those 5 days away, or even if you do it for 1 hour, 1 day a week, you now 5 out of 6, you've just eradicated well over 80% of the cumulative contact that the contact that kid's brain would go through.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
That is the easiest answer to this question besides telling parents that, no, Tommy's not going to be in the NFL, right? There's a 0.0026% that he's not going to be there. So don't make him play year round. You know, he's got a better chance of being a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant than he does being an NFL football player. But we've got to get, we've got to let reality drive it, and we've got to respect these kids' brain. I mean, we can go run down the whole thing, but brain health is not a priority in our country right now. When we understand how important the brain is, you have but one. It determines everything that you are, everything that you will be. Why the hell would we want to take any risk with it? I had this stupid NFL doctor named Dr. Maroon. I call him Dr. Moron, who literally came on my podcast and said, well, you got to take some risk. Anyway, I was like, you're going to take risk with a child's future? You even think that is a point of view that should be spoken today? Pah. Good thing you can't smack people on podcasts.
I listened to that, and you were pressing him, and all he could say is he got exasperated, and he says, oh, well, just don't play then. No, Don't allow the kids to ruin their brains for 14 years old, and then maybe. But I mean, I was astounded by, he just didn't have an answer. I don't know if the professional league is, a professional league is paying him. I don't know.
Oh no, he's been in, yeah.
The professional league. Well, all I could hear, at the end is him grasping at straws, knowing he's got a green beret and knowing he has this new glutathione, free radical scavenger, clinical trial he wants to do. Okay.
Yeah, making money.
Yeah, but okay, right? So, but back to the legislation. And I read your blog on Malcolm Gladwell, and talking about it took 50 years for them the coal miners to talk about the lung disease and so on and so forth. And it was like, how much proof is enough? How much do we have to? So it's tough. It's
no, absolutely. I mean, if you ever watch his speech, what he gave at the University of Pittsburgh after they just lost one of their both, he actually literally, it is a UPenn or a pen. Yeah. And he sits there, he says, why is an institution dedicated to academics and learning, right, still have a football team, and one of your students just died, and we know all about CTE and all this stuff? Yeah. You're right, sir. It's an amazing podcast, but I don't think we're the voice in the wilderness anymore. Good. I think that this is now the time. This is the time when Aunt of Karen's hard work is going to come to the forefront. We have people listening in Congress now. We do have, amazing podcasts like yours, and thank you both, and God bless you for having this podcast. We've got, RFK, call him crazy if you want. Right. He'll take a new look at anything. And now you've got, when I wrote my book for parents, and I thank you for putting it on your desk, there was only 2 or 3 pages of papers I could find on subconcussive trauma. It wasn't studied. Why? All the money was concussions and TBI, right? That's where all the money was. And doctors chase this money. They don't do anything with the knowledge. Sorry, they don't, That's why we're in this stupid business. But, it's like, and what about subconcussive trauma? And now type in subconcussive trauma or repetitive head impacts, and your Google screen will blow up. This is an onward crushing wave of science and research and knowledge that nobody can no longer dispute.
Every parent needs that book, Bruce. Every parent needs that book. How do we make that happen?
Yeah.
That's for free on the website.
No, don't buy this book. Buy this book because it goes to the PARKMAN Foundation, and it helps organizations like StopCTE.org. I bought it. It was only like $10 on Amazon. So,
thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, every parent should truly have that book. We're fighting big money, and the word concussion, you're right, mate. It obfuscates the real problem.
Well, I just saw Chris Nowinski yesterday or the day before calling out the hockey league because of Bobby Hall.
Yeah.
And I mean flat calling him out. And I was shocked that Chris is like, okay, now you got to get serious. When are we gonna? And I'm like, didn't they just start a research for this and now you're doubling down? Wow.
But I was frustrated. I just talked to Chris Nowinski, I don't know, last week or so. And because I was asking about, and I was reading your book and I was reading all the information and you were saying that there's so much information correlating and relating repetitive head impacts to mental illness. I said, well, Chris, talk about this. And he says, well, I guess he was on his Doctor of Neurology platform, and he says, well, there's not a lot of studies that relate mental illness to repetitive head impacts. And I'm like, well, I'm getting different stories. So
look at the dang symptoms.
Well, yeah,
Depression, aggression, executive function.
CTE side. I cannot get him or Dr. Amerkey to really discuss mental illness. Yeah. Mental illness is the number one indicator. What Patrick was going through, what my son was going through, was not
going through.
Well, he said,
yeah, what you're going through, right? You don't die from CTE.
It's not a death.
It is a condition in the brain. What you die from, or what you're suffering from, Corey, right now, is the mental illness that's emanating from your damaged brain, from RHI. We finally got them all to say, well, RHI is the root cause of CTE. Yay, all right. Yay, Karen and Bruce. Take all our research and digest it. But the issue is they refuse to look at the science that for 40 years, schizophrenia has been correlated with synaptic death in the prefrontal cortex. I've got papers from like the 80s. So if we knew it back then, and then Ann McKee's study found, all kinds of white and gray matter, damage, demyelination, blood-brain penetration, all kinds of toxic, neuroinflammation. This is the stuff that is breaking the brain down and causing mental illness. Mental illness just doesn't appear. These NFL players, if TES, and you look at the TES, Corey, you have TES. What are the three questions? Do you have a mental illness? Is it progressing? And have you been exposed to RHI? That's it. Yep. Your fourth question, have a familiar predisposition? If that's no. TES is the in vivo diagnosis of mental illness as a result of brain damage. It will become CTE, no problem, but you're already dead. So, I'll get off my horse there.
Well, I'm the closest.
Yeah, you're not going to get Chris Nowinski to talk about mental illness, bro. I don't know why.
I'm the closest you can get to getting a CTE endorsement. There's no closer than me dying and Ann McKee holding my brain in her head, which is on speed dial on my phone when I die.
Right.
And I guarantee it pissed me off when Paul told me this. And I'm like, are you flipping joking me? Where's my aggression? Where's my depression? Where's my anxiety? My overstimulation?
It's not mental illness.
It's not mental illness. Are you flipping kidding me? I wasn't like this 10 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. I've been suffering since I got diagnosed in 99 with cognitive nerve damage due to concussions at the University of San Francisco and rodeoing. And I also broke my neck at the same time. And it's exactly what you're saying about sports. You look at me, I started wrestling in junior high school, or even before junior high school. And then I was playing football. I boxed. I did karate, and I started rodeoing, and all of this just back to back nonstop. And then after my rodeo career, I ended up racing open wheel modifieds and got a concussion playing turkey football. I knew hitting your brain ain't good. I'm not dumb. I knew that hitting my brain is not good. All these concussions ain't, but I didn't know that all these RHIs were one day I heard a punch drunk. Well, I'm not a boxer. It didn't correlate with my brain. And now I look at it and I go, rodeo, you have to ride to learn. There's no other way. You can only ride the Mighty Bucky. You can only ride the dummy. You can only do that for so long, but until you're on one, you're not going to learn. 15 years old, man. Let's get the brain developed. Let's get all of this. You can get your body built up. You can get all of that going. And I'm like 15 years old, 14 years old. start putting them on the ponies. Don't get them on the big broncs, but put them on the ponies. Football, I'm with you. It's not up there. The website, Flag Football Until 14. Yeah. Because in your book, you talk about the protective sheeting. What is it called?
The myelin sheathing does in the prefrontal cortex. That's the last part of the brain to develop, I believe.
The prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop. The myelin is what protects all the axons that tie to the synapses. Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
And you look at my MRIs, I got atrophy in the frontal lobe cortex. Jeremy Tanner wrote it in my TES, frontal lobe atrophy. I've had PET scans. I've had MRIs. I've had just about every test you can possibly imagine. And I'm getting after Paul to get it because you can say what you want and suspect what you want, but proof is in the pudding.
Yes, sir.
So you said that you funded Boston University, and they looked at a bunch, not just Mac's brain, but a number of young under 30 brains, and you said every one of them, and then they played sports, they played football, they played what were the results of that study?
When we convinced Ann McKee to take another look at our son's brain for damage, because he didn't have CT, I said, all right, Dr. McKee, I wasn't expecting it, but did you find damage to the brain? She's like, why would you ask me that? I go, well, you looked at his brain, right? She goes, well, I don't look for that. I look for CTE and nothing else. I said, all right, Dr. McKee, do you think that my son's 11 years of playing contact sports, 10 and a half months a year, had anything to do with him taking his life? She goes, oh, absolutely. I said, well, Dr. McKee, I've read over 200 research papers. I'm writing a book, and I am absolutely convinced that my son's mental illness was caused by the thousands of hits he took, and there should be damage to his brain. And then she says, how did he die? Because Dr. McKee and any neurologist doesn't get the story, is to keep them unbiased, right? They just get the brain. Their job is CTE or no CT. The staff gets all the studies and they talk to the parents and they get all the history, but none of them, they do not mix. So we told her how Mac had departed, and she goes, I am going to take another look. And 6 months later, Karen calls me. She goes, I just got a call from Dr. McKee, and she says, it's all about the kids. And she sent me a note. She goes, Bruce, I read your book. It's all about the children. And so she called me up. She goes, would you fund a study? And I said, on my terms, and we're getting ready to release this because what I'm getting ready to tell you is kind of showing you how the research community works. Nothing against Dr. McKee, but this is how it works. So we paid for Boston University to finally, now this is the CTE center of the world, right? They finally went back. They looked at every brain under 30, 162 brains, okay? All of them. And what they did is they went and looked at them for, damage to the brain, physiological damage to critical structures, components of the brain. They were to look at the histories to look for cognitive, behavioral, psychological disorders. And then they were going to look at the means of death, right? How did they end up dying? The study was appalling. When it was released in August of 2023, it was released as, new study of young brains finds that 40% of them had CTE. And that's true. 50 something brains out of 162 had CTE. What was it buried in the study, and you have to tease it out in the data, is that 100% of those brains were found to have significant structural damage, all kinds of damage. You can name it. It's all in there, it just damage, structural white matter damage, gray matter damage to the prefrontal cortex, all kinds of damage, right? Then 100% of those brains were also found to have severe psychological, behavioral, cognitive disorders. There's your mental illness right there. Now, you can't look at the damage, but you have the mental illness. So you have 100% have structural damage, 100% have mental illness, and 80% of them died by suicide or overdose. The problem is not CTE. Every one of those brains was a sports player, an active sports player, a contact sports player that had thousands, tens of thousands hits. My son did not have CTE. Okay. As a matter of fact, 60% of the people and the brains in that study didn't have CTE, but they all died by suicide or drug overdose, and their brains were all found to be heavily impacted structurally, and they all had mental illness. So what is the bigger problem here? It's not CTE. Okay. And that's where, Karen and CTE is a recognized disease. It's a dilemma. It is the word. No, and there's nothing wrong with, people saying, I'm going to have CTE, and we will. I'm going to have CTE. I have no doubt. After playing semi-pro rugby and military rugby, being shot in the face, being around thousands of explosions, hundreds of parachute jumps, I got issues. I mean, the VA told me I got issues. Not just my wife telling me I have issues either, right? So, but the issue is that we're walking around the circle of RHI. It's the hidden elephant in the room, and nobody wants to talk about it, because it blows up a lot of research and studies that have been done. Sir, Corey, your diagnosis of TES is unbelievable, because that right there is the diagnosis that every NFL player will have, unless they're a quarterback or a kicker for the most part, right? That every rugby player will have, that every hockey player, anybody that has played a lot of contact sports, and just think of all the adults out there right now that didn't make it along in his life, that weren't as impacted as Mac or Patrick, that are struggling through divorces and bad business problems and depression, anxiety. And and we'll get to this in a little bit, but we have no medical nursing or psychological training in this issue at all. They're misdiagnosed, they're mistreated with drugs and therapy, and they continue to spiral. This is the largest preventable cause of mental illness in the United States. Yep. No doubt. If we eradicate RHI in our children, and then we control it as they become adults, they can be very wealthy sports people without look at you two, right? You two are representative of an industry right now that hurts brains, that hurts human beings, that leaves them alone to find their way back to their families through treatments that are no longer covered by insurance or not covered by insurance. Okay. And so we are and just think of the car crash victims. We can go on and on for a long time, but that study was the smoking gun. Mm-hmm. And when it was released, we're like, all right, 40%. When I read the study, I'm like, we got to re-release this thing, because there's a much bigger story here that every parent should know about.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Paradise Behavioral Health in Punta Gorda, Florida. Dr. DeMayo is sponsoring this episode of Head Rush, and she deals with...
She's a doctor of psychiatry, and she has the Paradise Behavioral Health and the Brain Well program, and which we're both on. So we're very excited to have Dr. Mizell DeMayo as a sponsor for the next 10 or 11 months, right?
Right.
So it's awesome to have them on board, and thank you very much. And definitely go to their website, learn about what they do, learn about they call it precision psychiatry, and she's right for anything that ails you. So go check them out on the web, Paradise Behavioral Health, and look for the Brainwell program.
And she also deals with the Millennium Health Protocol and the hormones that me and Paul both are part of. So go check them out. Thank you, Mizell. You're awesome. What would help you guys with us doing our podcast and talking about this? And I think we're special in a podcast like Bruce, you have yours, but I actually suffer from TES, and Paul is suspected and has issues. And so I think this podcast is good for that reason, that we're talking out about a disease we have and our issues and our problems. Where can we help your foundations, and where can we go to? How can we support you guys to get bigger and more words out? Am I saying it right?
I mean, obviously we want to spread the news. We want to spread the gospel, and how can we be of assistance to both of your organizations? And, you're both doing unbelievable work. You guys have teamed together on many of your issues. Whatever we can do to help. And we're talking about the knowledge. We're talking about making people aware. I'm actually going to have the opportunity to travel with the former Chief Justice up in New Hampshire to high schools and talk to the parents about mental health. And it's kind of funny because he says, what do a former Chief Justice and an NFL player have in common? Just about nothing, right? But I've got, and Karen might have seen the one, I did a little 90-second deal where I slammed two helmets together. And I show what happens in one of those 49 G force collisions for two helmets. And I talk about, inflammation can last up to 17 years after your last repetitive hit or your last subconcussive hit. Right. One of the things that the good doctor from Pittsburgh that you were talking to, Bruce, on one of your last podcasts was saying, well, you were talking about, 1,000 to 1,500, the sensors on the helmets, 1,000 to 1,500 per season. I played 11 years professionally, 20 years, organized, banging my head. And he started saying, well, the mouthpiece sensor says it's much less. And I'm like, okay, you just ruined your case, because if it's much less, it's a lot less repetitive hits that cause damage. More, yeah. I mean, maroon or whatever. Anyway, that was, I couldn't, I enjoyed your podcast on that, but, it's the knowledge.
Thank you.
You guys,
it is the knowledge.
You guys kind of instruct us right now how to help spread that knowledge and share that knowledge and try to educate people. What does it work for you, Karen?
I would just like to say, push Bruce's book as much as you can. It's like, it tells the story very, very easy to read. It's not like reading a scientific book and you really get what's going on. And the other thing what I love about you two is you're helping your community of brothers who probably all have, and sisters who probably all have some repetitive head trauma. And you're all having similar issues or similar things. And I think it's wonderful that you're there for your community, and I applaud that. One thing that I would love to get out there is our healthcare navigation guide for people to take to their doctors and help them get the doctors to understand what's going on. And I know a lot of times the reason we started that was because we would talk to people and they'd say, I went to my doctor, or I have my doctor appointment next week. I'm excited. And then they'd come back and I'd say, well, what happened? And they couldn't remember half of it. And I'd say, did you remember to tell about this symptom or that symptom?
You're traumatized by the whole process.
Yeah.
Just going to the doctor, being handed a clipboard with 44 questions.
It's hell to go through.
So if people would just use that guide, hopefully, I think most people in the CTE RHI community don't want to go to doctors. They've given up. I know Patrick, he said, they can't help me, Mom. They could have helped him had we guided them a little bit. And so that's why we prepared this guide. And it's not the end all. I would love to hear back from people ways I could improve it. But I just would say maybe advertise that a little bit for us. Mm-hmm. And
I go to Glenn Briggs Institute in October for my annual deal. The Glenn Briggs Neurodegenerative Institute at UT Health San Antonio, Jeremy Tanner, And I'll take that guy down to him. And I'm also going to take it to my local neurologist that works with Jeremy to work with me. And I'll take that to them and show them also, because I think that's a great way to go about it. And I got to thank you for building that. And like I said, I went through hell from 99, having problems all the way up until October of last year to get my diagnosis, and numerous neurologists. 2014, I had a neurologist tell me, a year ago, we couldn't have diagnosed you. There wasn't enough research. And I go, what are you talking about? And he said it again, the cognitive damage due to all the hits you've taken. A year ago, thanks to the NFL, we found this. And I'm like, thanks to the NFL. But yeah, it took me until October of last year to get my TES. And I took MRIs, neurological exams, everything, PET scans, everything I've had done to him to get that. And so, yes, Karen, you are absolutely correct. And I will do that. Bruce, what do you want us to do?
Well, we'll start at the top of my list. But first, you keep doing what you're doing. All right. We're all a community. Okay. You two represent an entire industry that represents tens of thousands, tens of thousands of men and women that have played your sport, and hundreds of thousands of family members that are affected by the impact of the damage done to your brains. The message that you should be helping us with is that there is hope. Okay. The legislation that we just wrote, we now know that if we could have found Pat and Mac when they were with what we know now, we could have absolutely improved their life. We could have taken the shade of mental illness off them, and we could have made them functioning human beings again. But it's taking, a lot of people don't want to take these exams. They think CTE is a death sentence, and it's not. We've got an entire litany. You've already mentioned Mark Gordon's brain supplementation plan. There's like 15 or 19 different electronic modalities, from hot cold therapy, HBOT, vagus nerve stimulation, photobiomodulation, TMS, that are known to positively impact the brain and help it heal. Okay. We have all the psychedelics, which are doing amazing things, not only in brain inhaling, but helping these men overcome their moral issues and becoming better human beings. And then we've got outpatient issues. I'd recommend stellate ganglion blocks to both of you, which turns off your fight or flight mechanism like that. Very big in special operations and doctors. And I just laid out a whole bunch of therapies there that we know can create a positive brain, a positive, healthy environment for the brain to heal, and to go ahead and promote the healing necessary to literally get these people off their SSRIs, off their drugs. A lot of these people that have gone through these treatments have been veterans of war. We have repetitive blast exposure, and we're now pushing this to the NFL community because these treatments save lives. These treatments make men and women better. What is appalling right now is that we have no education and awareness, which is what you're doing. This is key. What you're doing right now is putting the word out, but we still got medical doctors, medical nursing and psychologists out there receive no training in this. They have no idea that when a Patrick or a Mac comes to them, they cannot ask those 4 questions. I can diagnose Paul with TES right now. He's had more than 5 years of experience of a RHI. He's got a mental illness. It might be progressing. I don't know about that. Right there, that's TES. That is how simple it is. And with scans and proof of his years in the NFL, he should be seeing a neurologist to get diagnosed. That is what's missing right now in every doctor clinic in this country. That's all it takes.
You just diagnosed me, so I don't need to.
No. You want me to call my Colosco?
You go get the doctor.
Expert.
Nobody talks about TES, which is amazing that you do, because that is something that, well, the CTE community doesn't really want to talk about too much. The TES protocols were validated by the Neurological Institution of Disease, Strokes, and Disorders, NINDS, in 2019. They have yet to be validated. They were approved, but not validated. Once validated, they could become a protocol. Just imagine if every nurse, doctor, suicide prevention specialist, psychologist knew to ask those 4 questions. How many lives could we change by saying, hey, I think Tommy's played too much sports. Okay? Just that knowledge right there could save so much pain and help people that are suffering in silence understand why. Corey, you talked about closure. Once you understand why you're mentally ill, now you got a problem to fix, right? And we're solution oriented people. Let's get on it. So those things right there is how, you can then with us, sir, if you could promote, the podcast, we have an app now in the Google and Apple store called Head Smart. For parents, right? You can download it. It's got the book on it. It's got all this stuff. You can look up specialists, and out there we got our book. You got all the trade shows and the materials that Karen and the Patrick RISHA Foundation. Go out there and educate yourself. Because as we tell people all the time, because nobody's trained on this yet, you are standing between your children and mental illness. If you do not become smart and you do not stand in that front line, or if you're a parent and you're not telling that coach, you're not throwing soccer balls at my kid's head for 5 minutes a day, and he's not practicing 5 days a week. I'm moving him to this team over here that only practices 1 day a week. When we start putting that knowledge in our parents' head, and a lot of dads are dumb. I'm sorry, I was one of them, but nobody messes with Mama Bear. And that's what we want to do. If we can reach out to any parenting, and we went to 42 podcasts on parents. None of them wanted to touch this free message, right? So anyways, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing an amazing job. You have the credibility with both of your industries for men to come to you, women to come to you. And we, the Patrick RISHA Foundation, and our foundation are here to help guide you. We have information, resources. We can educate them, make them aware. They can go back to the NFL and get the disability they deserve. Okay. They can go back, and I don't know what you have the Professional Rodeo Association, some of the other stuff, but at least they can fight for disability, get a TES diagnosis. And then we're the ones that are both of us are pushing Congress to mandate that these treatments that are known to help the brain are now covered. It's the fact that they're not out of pocket is all a big play, right? They want all this proof in medical research. When people are taking their lives and people are suffering mental illness, and we know that drugs and therapy are not working because they will not heal the brain, we have to make these alternative modalities available because they would have taken care. I am absolutely 100% convinced that if Karen and I would have known about this path, and I would have known that our son was suffering, that my wife and I could have saved my son's life. We didn't have none of this knowledge. That's how fast this is moving, gentlemen. And your podcast is right there, right in the thick of it with all of us. And I cannot thank you enough. Conference, September 3rd and 4th this year, man. I'd love to have you do a podcast at our show, man. We're going to have all the good, all the biggies are going to be there, man. Everybody's already asking if they can come. I was like, yeah, we're just waiting on dates, so we'll get it out there.
Great. You already answered our last question. We ask all of our guests, what gives you hope for the future in CTE treatment and awareness? Thank you. That was perfect. And I want to touch on exactly what you were saying. And Karen, if we had only known, when I found out and I started researching CTE and the repetitive head impacts and subconcussive hits, because I thought I had probably about 10 to 11,000 of them. When I understood what it was and the symptoms, I started saying, you know what, if I'm not organic to the point where I can't make a cognitive decision to stop yelling at my daughter and walk out the front door, then I'm in trouble. Can I do it? And you know what? I went from going 0 to 60 redlining once every 3 weeks to once every quarter to once every 6 months to once a year. And once in a while now, if somebody really ticks me off, road rage will get me. But yes. Exactly. If you only knew, if these parents only knew, and we got to make sure they know. And we're dedicated. Corey and I are dedicated with the Head Rush podcast to do this and to join arms with you guys and to stand with you. So thank you. Wow, what an amazing episode, and we are so thrilled. And I want to, obviously, we want to invite you back, whether it's 6 months or whatever, and we want to hear the advancements that you guys have stood for, and we would appreciate it someday.
And I'll say this straight up. Once I found that TES, I asked doctors, so now what? Now what? Well, we can treat the symptoms, but not the disease. There's no cure for CTE. And I'm with you. I say it every flipping episode. CTE is not a death sentence. I am not dead until the blood leaves my body and I am breathing. There is hope. And I got a directory of people I call when I'm down in the dumps and I'm about ready to chase a rabbit down the hole. And what you say is absolutely true with the medical field, because I had to go off medical, and thank God I had the money to go to DeMayo and Mark Gordon protocol to get on that to lower my inflammation. Because I'll tell you right now, my wife told you last August, we're talking August. If I did not start getting the help I needed, she probably told you I probably wouldn't be here today. That I was that down. I mean, I went and parked at the tree that I hit, and thought about hitting the tree again. I thought about ways, and it's like I told Casey Kennedy on the phone, the problem with us is I thought about it so many times. I know how I'm going to commit suicide. I've thought about it. But because of my faith in the Lord and my morals, my values, and honestly, to be perfectly honest, I'm scared I'd screw it up, and then what? But
the hope,
But the hope is there. And since I found Paul and got on the Gordon protocol, and since I found the Patrick RISHA Foundation and the Mac Parkman, and I listened to your podcast, there's so much hope out there, people, that all you have to do is find it and go out there and but there's not enough awareness. Casey said he had a hell of a hard time trying to find a place to take Pete's brain. That there was nothing online. Him and his uncle struggled. That's how hard it is. And I mean, I found it, thank God, through Concussion Legacy Foundation, and got a hold of Michael Osco and them in Boston. And on my phone, it's a speed dial for Boston University. If I die, you hit a button and it goes to the 24-hour call service. But you guys are so right. We need to get the word out there. This can be cured. It can't be cured, but you can have a good life even if you have this disease.
No doubt.
I have struggles. I have bad days, but because of me knowing with that TES endorsement and talking to the professionals I have, I know that this too shall pass.
And one of the greatest decisions I think you made, Paul, if I heard you correctly, Corey, was to let your wife drive. And you just,
Yeah, I'm not supposed to drive no more. No. And
don't tell her to hit the other car.
Right. And
he can still yell, but at least he's not behind the wheel.
And, it's like she turned on the wipers one day and I flipped out. What the hell are you doing? And I mean, just that quick. And as far as therapies, I go to vestibular therapy once a week. I talk to a therapist once a week on stuff I don't want to talk to my wife about, even though I'm pretty open with my wife because she understands this disease. She's on the support group with Concussion Legacy Foundation. She's on the ambiguous loss support group. She's on the caregiver support group. I'm on the support group at Concussion for CTE. And we pay attention to what you guys do. And I called my congressman and said, make this day CTE Awareness Day. We need to get the word out there because even cowboys are this ain't just rodeo, or this just ain't NFL, excuse me. Just because you played in the NFL, this is bigger than that. They found soccer players. They're finding domestic abuse. They're finding it in rugby. They're finding it in hockey, in rodeo. They're finding it in all these contact sports. And so we need to get that out there. And I was in a dark place trying to figure out where to go. And what am I going to do now? I'm not man no more. I can't work no more. I don't have no executive function. My multitasking is gone. Oh. I can't do this. What am I going to do now? What's going to make me a man? What's going to make me proud of what I do? I'm a cowboy, dang it. I don't back down. I cowboy up. Yeah. And what God taught me to do is this right here. This is my guiding light. This is what works for me. Is when me and Paul hooked up and we talked about the podcast and we got you guys involved. This is my guiding light. This is what God is leading me to do, is say, you know what? This affects who would think an NFL player from New Hampshire, and a rodeo cowboy from California would meet up in Dallas, Texas and have a podcast. I mean, You want to talk about two opposite worlds. We called them wussies, in rodeo. Oh, you got I can't ride. I got a separated shoulder. I'm riding tomorrow.
All right. You see these scars right here? Actually, this one when I got knocked out from Pittsburgh, this gouge is probably the one right there. So anyway, no, yeah, but yes, to everybody's point, rugby players don't wear helmets and cowboys don't either. So whatever. So listen. You guys have been awesome. We are so blessed to have you, and we're gonna shout it from the rooftops, and we're gonna share your news. I'm gonna take the healthcare navigation guide to the head neurologist at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. He was my guy when I had my 2 strokes in 7 days 7 years ago. So. And he actually, I'm not supposed to bang the table. He actually played offensive line at Brown University. And I said, oh, you used your brain for, becoming a doctor. And I just, bashed my brain in another 11 years. So, all right, everybody. Wow.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. I love this episode. Thank you, Karen, for everything you do for the Head Rush podcast. Thank you, Doug. You both are awesome, lovely people. And I can't wait to meet you and do something with y'all in person. Hopefully I can make it to Tampa Bay. I'm on disability now, so funds are limited. And Bruce, I love your podcast, Broken Brains podcast. You do it every week. It's awesome. You get after the meat of the problem with the meaty guys, man. And I love it. And it takes a Green Beret like you to just get after it. And I enjoy it.
Get meaner.
You're a great interviewer.
Well, I mean, I'm looking up to your podcast now, boys. You're doing a great job, man. You're setting the standard. And, you're talking about very critical stuff, and you have the credibility. Like I said, keep doing what you're doing. I just appreciate the time, as hard it is to talk about my son, and then hoping that, and it's always great to see Karen and Doug, but, I just, anything we can do for you, let us know. You're doing a great job.
But hopefully through all of this, and I'm going to end it on a good note. Hopefully through all of this and what you all are doing and what we're doing, it gives Patrick and Mac's death a goal, and that we can get the word out there. And it's because of them that forced you two to get after it. And it's because of me getting TES and you having issues that we're getting after it. So, I'm hoping that with everything we all are doing, Concussion Legacy Foundation and everybody, what everyone is doing, Boston University, what everyone is doing, their death don't go in vain.
It brings honor to your sons, and
exactly.
And, thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And thank you for your service again, Bruce. Thank you.
And everybody out there, thank you very much for joining us, and join us next time for the Head Rush podcast. Thank you, our esteemed guests, Doug and Karen Zagel, from the CTE, Patrick RISHA CTE Awareness Foundation, and Bruce Parkman from the Mac Parkman Foundation. Thank you. We really appreciate it, and we love you guys. And we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna shout it from the rooftops. Thank you all.
Stay alert. Stay alive. Let's have fun.
God bless you guys.
God bless you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general information only and does not constitute the practice of medicine. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard and delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.
Mm.